Hi everybody, my name is Bailey Rung. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a former Congressional debater from Blaine High School in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm currently a freshman at Western Kentucky University, where I'm a Communications Studies major. I'm an active competitor in NFALD debate, as well as extemp and impromptu speaking. Today we'll be analyzing the semifinals legislation at the 2014 Glenbrooks tournament. We'll give some relevant background information on each piece of legislation, go over the implications in the line-by-line of the bills and resolutions proper, as well as discuss the affirmative and negative arguments that are possible within each round. Let's start with Semis 1, a bill to establish a national infrastructure bank. This idea originated in 2007 with the introduction of a bill by Senators Chuck Hagel and Christopher Dodd. They envisioned a U.S. federal bank that would grant loans to private and public investors wishing to construct, maintain, or repair infrastructure in the United States. While the NIB idea bill was failed shortly thereafter, its idea was hinted at by Barack Obama in 2008 and 2010 when he outlined its possible reintroduction or further study. The impetus behind the idea of a national infrastructure bank originated from the 2007 D+ rating of U.S. infrastructure by the American Society for Civil Engineers. Obviously, we're close to failing. In fact, U.S. infrastructure spending is at its lowest since the Great Depression. Some of us are still using infrastructure left over from the Eisenhower era. Compounding this issue of crumbling roads and telephone lines is a lack of communication between state governments and the federal government, meaning that, long story short, infrastructure along the United States is failing, and nobody's doing anything about it. That's the impetus behind this piece of legislation. So let's take a look at it. Section 1 explains that this NIB will be an independent government-owned corporation. Some definitions are offered in Section 2. Subsection A explains that infrastructure is energy, environmental, telecommunications, or transportation, and that the National Infrastructure Bank will dole out loans and oversee their operation. Subsection B explains this independent government-owned corporation is an entity that's administered by the federal government, but operates with a fair degree of autonomy, similar to the FDIC, another GOC. Section 3 explains some of the logistics of the NIB, specifically how its members are appointed and how they'll operate. Subsection A explains that the board of directors and the CEOs will establish their own regulations and rules for the operation of the bank, their own parliamentary procedure. Subsection B explains that the loans and loan guarantees doled out by the infrastructure project, as well as the public benefit for providing financing, will be the responsibility of the board of directors of the FID. Subsection C explains that the bank will give $5 billion for appropriations for the first 5 years. The United States government will grant them this money. After it becomes self-sustaining, it'll use the capital that it gains from investment to operate on its own. Subsection D explains the limitations of the National Infrastructure Bank. For instance, if any project costs more than 10% of the bank's loanable funds, it won't be approved. Similarly, if it encompasses more than 5% of its capital, that project will rest to the same fate. Section 4 explains that the bill takes effect in fiscal year 2016, which starts in October of 2015. So, for this piece of legislation, the end story is that we'll have a pooled, centralized fund for infrastructure investment administered by one single entity, the NIB. Let's talk about some possible advantage and disadvantage scenarios for affirmative and negative debaters alike. Before we do so, it's important to understand, because the debate will be so broad, given the variety of literature on U.S. infrastructure, clash has to happen. There won't be any excuse in the judge's eyes not to have pre-prepared and unique arguments. Because the duration of the debate will likely be substantial, those speaking later in the round should probably focus on crystallizing and weighing the debate. There certainly will be ground for it. Let's talk about possible affirmative arguments, and I think they can be divvied up into 4 distinct areas. The first is administration. Because the United States federal government will use one single entity to administer these loans and oversee programs, the standards on how construction and infrastructure maintenance will take place across the country will obviously be standardized. At the same time, because infrastructure programs will be overseen by one single entity, it means that coordination and communication by every actor, whether they be a private entity in California to the Maine Department of Public Works, will have to make sure everything is up to par with the federal government, and that any sort of building material or specifications will likely be the same. This improved efficiency is not only beneficial to wiping out the bureaucracy that's typically endemic to infrastructure programs, but more likely makes them more efficient, and the projects will actually be carried out. The second possible avenue for argumentation for the affirmative comes in terms of funding. Right now, obviously, there's no centralized bank which doles out funds. With the implementation of the NIB, loans will be given out quicker and will be more direct, meaning that desperately needed infrastructure programs will happen sooner. But moreover, because there's one bank with a large amount of capital, projects already in works or ones that are proposed in the future will be much more likely to be actually carried out, whereas most infrastructure programs in the United States never lift off or see completion.